The first cause of discouragement is just simply being worn out. You get wore out. Just like those horses hauling logs up a hill, we get wore out. In Judah, it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild the wall. They had been working hard, but still things weren't going anywhere. It felt like to them that they weren't really making any kind of progress. They had lost their enthusiasm for the work. How familiar does that sound? I'm not just going anywhere with this. Nehemiah chapter 4 verse 6 says, "So built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof. For the people had a mind to work." So at the time when they had the mind to work, it was at the beginning, and the enthusiasm was there, and they'd say, you know what, we can do this, we can get through this. They had the mind to work, and it felt like to them that they were progressing, they were making things right. They were fixing the wall, they were rebuilding the temple. Things were happening until it got to halfway done. Halfway. That's where we often get discouraged. In the middle of everything, in the middle of the job, in the middle of the situation, we get discouraged. When we're in the thick of it, the kids get excited to go on a hike or for a walk, but halfway around the block, they get tired. When do you get tired of your new car? When it's half paid for. When does school feel the most boring? After lunch. What's the most depressing part of winter? About halfway through. And where are we at in this lesson? About halfway. Halfway through is when we get worn out. Like rowing a boat across a big lake. In the middle of the lake, you're worn out. But you realize the turn back is fruitless. I mean, you're halfway, right? When you are worn out and discouraged, sometimes the only thing that sounds good, really good, is sitting still. When you're out in the middle of that lake, you look forward, you have another halfway to go, you look back, you have another halfway to get back, and sometimes you just put the rows back in the boat, the oars back in the boat, and just sit there. Sit still. Sometimes that sounds good. Listen, take care to not lose enthusiasm of completion. Be careful not to lose the enthusiasm of completion. Find comfort in finishing what is started. And the best way to accomplish that is by recognizing you are in Him and understanding your gifts and abilities He has given to you. The second cause of discouragement is to be weighted down. Weighted down. Verse 10 says, "And Judah said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall." Much rubbish. They were looking at the total job instead of just their section. They were looking at what everybody else was supposed to do. Not just them, but everybody was supposed to do their thing. And they got focused on what everybody else was or perhaps wasn't doing. And they got discouraged. Rocks everywhere. They were trying to juggle too much. And they let life just pile up on them. To fight against this, we must do three things. To fight against this feeling of being weighted down, we must do three things. The first thing that we need to do in our life is to prioritize. Not just what's the most fun, but what's the most important. Not only what's most urgent, but truly important. Set aside daily time for God as a priority. Set aside time for family or for a project and for church. When it comes to engagements in our life, we need to set priorities of importance with those things outside of what we would call church functions. Those are times that are off limits, and nothing needs to take priority above those things. Time with God in prayer and devotion, that's a priority. Time with family, that's a priority. Time in our church groups, especially during this time, is a priority. Time in KG, young people, is a priority. That's God's time. And we need to understand our priorities are important and keep those in its right perspective. These are all God's ordained moments in our life. Don't take God's time and give it to anybody else. The second thing is plan. Don't bounce around like a pinball on a machine, but learn to live by a schedule. Be organized. Most people don't plan to fail, they just fail to plan. And it leads to a bigger failure. Number 3, plod. What that means is, just take one day at a time. Don't look at what's going to happen next month or 3 months from now or 6 months from now. What's going to happen for you today, the day that you're living in, and maybe what's going to happen for you tomorrow. One day at a time. Just plot it along. What do I need to do today? What's number 1 on my agenda today? What's important for me in my life today? How do you paint a 10,000 room house? How does anybody paint a 10,000 room house? What is a 10,000 room house? But how do you paint one? One room at a time. Just one room at a time. Another cause of discouragement is that they were wasting away. Wasting away. Verse 11 says, "And our adversary said, They shall not know, neither see, till we come in the midst among them and slay them and cause the work to cease." Their enemies were planning. The enemy was planning. Enemies are planning. The enemy has a plan. So we might as well form a game plan too, ourselves. The devil's plan is to hit us when we're down and discouraged, and we won't even see him coming. That's his plan. So our plan must be not to sit still in discouragement, but to escape it and get out of it. Isaiah chapter 54 verse 7 says, "No weapon that is fashioned against you shall succeed, and you shall confute every tongue that rises against you in judgment. That is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication from me, declares the Lord." So now that we have the cause, let's look at the cure for discouragement. Nehemiah gave his people 3 steps to get out of discouragement. Number 1, Nehemiah armed the people. Nehemiah chapter 4 verse 13 says this, "So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open places, I stationed the people by their clans with their swords, their spears, and their bows." Basically what he was saying is we're not going to take the enemy's advance lying down. We're not going to just sit back and know that the enemy has a plan for us and us not do anything about it. We're going to arm ourselves. We're going to prepare ourselves against what the enemy is trying to do against us. He equipped them to fight against what the enemy was going to try to do. Discourage them from completing their tasks. That's what the enemy was going to try to do. Discourage them. Prevent them from building the wall. There's a statement that says to be forewarned is to be forearmed. Think about it. We already know what Satan is going to try to do, what he's going to try to accomplish against us. He's going to attack us with discouragement. So we are foolish if we don't prepare ourselves. And finally, be strong in the Lord and the strength of his might. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10 through 13 says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you might be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you might be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm." And then it goes on in detail in Scripture, each piece of armor that we're supposed to put on, that it wants us to put on. Once again, it's talking about preparation, equipping us. And that equipment is the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the gospel of peace, the shield of faith, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit. These are the things that God equips us with to fight against the plan that the enemy wants to throw at us. This is what you can know for certain. God is on our side. You know that for certain. Don't question it. Don't allow that voice telling you otherwise. You know for sure today, and you can know for sure tomorrow that God is on your side. You do not have to be discouraged.